Hello and welcome to this first lesson of Motion for Beginners. Okay, once you've opened up a new Motion project, simply by clicking the Motion button down here and choosing to open a new blank Motion project, you'll be confronted with the new Motion 5 layout. We've got a few things going on here. In the top right we have the viewer, where you can see what you're editing and creating, much like the preview screen in Final Cut Pro. We've also got a timeline, which is a chronological editor, just like in Premiere or Final Cut, where you arrange your elements and you can play back in real time and watch what's happening. You've got a layers bar at the top here, where you can layer up different elements of media one on top of the other, like in Photoshop. And then on the left hand side, we've got the file browser here, where we can navigate to select the files we want for our project from off our computer. We've got the library, which contains all the presets and interesting library elements that you can add, like motion, particle effects, adding rectangles and primitive shapes. And we've got the inspector, where we can look at the properties of an individual element that we have selected, either in the layers viewer or in the timeline viewer down here. First things first, let's import in the media we need for our project. For this project, we're going to make a lower third or Aston, so we need only one thing really, which is our source footage, which I have over here. That's on my desktop, so I'm just going to drag that in and put it into my layers folder. It'll automatically make it a new group, as it's the first time that's put in here, and we can kind of group different elements together into groups that have shared characteristics and stuff. So you see we've got our movie here, and if I go down to my timeline, I can see that as my timeline slider was halfway down, it's imported it halfway along. So I'm going to drag that over to the start of the project. And I'm just going to mute my movie, because we don't want to hear that playing in the background. So I'm going to click the little speaker icon down here, right click the audio, which is the green thing, and go mute. And then click the speaker again to go back to my normal view. Okay, perfect. So I've got my movie in there, and if I click play we can see it's playing. What I need to do now is make the Aston itself. So to do that, I go to the library, and I'm going to go, once I'm in the library, I'm going to go down until I see shapes, and then I'm going to select a shape that I want. So I'm just going to go for a simple blue rectangle. I'm going to drag that over once again to my layers folder, and I'm going to put it into the same group, or I'm going to put it in a different group even, to my movie. So now that's in group 1 on the top, and we can see a little blue rectangle appears here, but it's a bit small. So I'm going to hover my mouse over the corner, and I'm going to resize this, and this is going to be the bar that the text's going to sit on top of, just to set it apart from the background so it's easier to read. And you can resize that with the corners. There we go. So I'm going to get it roughly the right size and shape. It doesn't matter too much. Once I've got my bar, I'm going to need to add the text. So to do that, I'm going to use the text tool, which is down here on the video editing pane. We can see if I hover my mouse over it, it's a T. I'm going to click that, and then I'm going to click and drag over the viewer window where I want the text to be, and I'm going to type out the name of the person. And as this is an interview, I'm also going to put their kind of job role or some description to give the viewer an idea of who we're looking at here. So there we go. Right, so I've written that out, but what I need to do now is have a play with the text. To do this, I'm going to go into the inspector over here, which is up in the top right. Once I click that, we can start to see some different settings for the text. I'm going to highlight his name, and I want to make that bigger than his job title. So with it highlighted, I'm going to go over to the size option down here, the slider bar, and click and drag the size out to make it a bit bigger. There we go, perfect. I can also do other stuff, so I can also change the colour if I wanted. There's lots we can do here. We can change the font. So if I wanted to change the font, I could highlight the text, go to the font selection here, and we can choose something else. Impact, Iron Old Style, and we see it updates in the viewer window on the right hand side. I'm just going to stick with Jungle because that's easier. Perfect, okie dokie. So next we're going to go to properties. I'm going to come out of that because we don't actually need any more. And now we've got the text, we've got the background, we've kind of got our Aston there, but if we have a look, it's not going to do anything, it's just sitting there. I'm going to highlight the group 1, and I'm going to drag that over to the start of the timeline as well. We can see we've got a problem here as well. The text is going to disappear as we go through, so if I click play, the text disappears, and that's because we can see down on the timeline that the Mark Ragnarsson section of timeline ends abruptly at 62 frames. If you hover your mouse over the end, the icon will change, and we can drag that out so it takes up the rest of it, so it's the same length as everything else. Perfect. Okay, what we want to do though is make this a bit more interesting. We want our Aston or our lower third to come into shot, and we're going to animate it to do this. So what we're going to do, make sure that your text and your rectangle is in a separate group, so group number 1 to your video, that should be in a separate group. Select just the group that's got your text and your rectangle in. Go to the properties bar in the inspector, and we're going to animate it in. How we're going to do this is we're going to drag it off screen, and we're going to go to the position section over here. We're going to click the little drop down arrow, and we're going to go add keyframe. Then we're going to play our thing, and where we want it to appear by on the time, we're going to scroll along on the timeline to where we want the lower third to appear by, and we're going to drag that in. So if we drag that over now, and if you hold down shift on your keyboard, it'll keep it in line horizontally with where we started off with off screen. And I'm going to let go there. Oh, no I'm not. And there we go. Perfect. So now we can see if I go backwards, we've created a very simple animation where our lower third or Aston appears in shot. Next thing we want to do though is we want to make it a bit more interesting than that. So what we're going to do is we're going to have it fade out at the end. So I'm going to scroll along on my timeline towards the end, but not all the way to the end. I'm going to go about 2 seconds before it ends. I'm going to select group 1 again. I'm going to go back into the inspector, click back on the properties, and once again we're going to keyframe in a very simple animation. Go to your blending section over here, and under the opacity section, go to the drop down menu, the little arrow, click it, go add keyframe, scroll along to the end, and then move the opacity bar down. Opacity is how see-through something is, how transparent it is. Drag that all the way down to the bottom. And now we can see we've animated in a very simple fade out there. So it moves in, holds on screen for a second for people to read it, and then it fades out. Perfect. So we've got a very simple lower third or Aston. I want to make it a little bit more interesting than that though, so we're going to add a simple graphic to it. What we're going to do is we're going to go into the library, and underneath replicators there's some interesting little animations. So go replicators and mats, and I know the one I want is in the arcs, so I'm going to click arc number 7. And if we click arc number 7 or any of the arcs, you'll see in the top left hand you can preview this cool little animation, this little graphic. Once you've found the one you want, I'm going to go for arc number 7 because I like that one. Drag it over once again into your layers and deposit it in the same group as your text and your rectangle, so group 1 for me. That will appear there. Now select your arc 7 and your arcs layers. So hold down shift on your keyboard if you need to. So in layers, hold down the invisible arcs layer and arcs number 7, so they're selected. Move them over in the window and resize them so that they are roughly in the right place. And then in your timeline, just make sure that you select these little drop down arrow here to select both the arcs and all of the elements within them, and drag them all the way over to the start, just like we did before with everything else. So now if we click play, we see we've got a little graphic on there. We need to move the text over there, don't we, because the graphic's in the way. So if we then make sure that we select the text layer and only the text layer in your layers window here, and then drag your text over so it's not in the way. There we go. And now we've got a cool little graphic there. The only problem is, if you can see here, I've got the edge of my blue rectangle kind of poking out, and I don't want that. Ooh, it looks a bit ugly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a mask, and a mask is a way of making a part of an image invisible. So I'm going to select the rectangle layer, the blue rectangle, and then I'm going to go down to my timeline, and there's this little almost like picture frame icon here. If you hover your mouse over, it will say rectangle mask tool. Click that, and then draw out a rectangle, and where we want to draw it from is halfway along our graphic there, all the way over the blue rectangle to right. We want to draw this rectangle over everything of the rectangle we want to keep and that we don't want to be invisible. And if I let go now, you'll see it's made everything over here, the blue rectangle, invisible. And that's just going to make it a bit more appealing to look to. It's going to look like where that cool spiral graphic is where the rectangle cuts off, even though it wasn't. So if we click play now, we've got a lower third in our raster, it appears in, and then they all fade out. There you go, we've made a very, very simple lower third or raster there. Thank you for watching, and good luck with making your own rasters. Be creative and have a play.